All right, in the second part of our first lesson of our algebra unit, we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting polynomials first. So this is when I've got two polynomials and I'm either going to put an adding sign in between or a subtracting sign in between. So in the first example, I'm adding these two polynomials. And what that means is I'm going to add and subtract the coefficients on the like terms. So we need to understand what a like term is. A like term means that I have the same variable, and really importantly, I also have the same exponent. So in this first example, I can see here that I've got an x squared term here. The variable is x, the exponent is 2. And I've got another x squared term here. The variable is x, the exponent is 2. So those are like terms. I also have this one here, which has an x with no exponent, or the exponent of 1. It's just not written there. And then this one here, the variable x and the exponent 1 again. So I know that those two are like terms. I can combine those two. And then last but not least, these extra guys here have no variable and no exponent. So they are another like term. Now, because it's an adding in between the two brackets, that means I can just go ahead and start combining by adding the coefficients on the like terms. So I'm going to add the yellow terms first that I've highlighted. So I've got 2x squareds and 4x squareds, and I'm adding them together to get 6x squareds. And then taking a look at the green ones that I've highlighted, I've got 3 x's. And don't forget the sign in front, I've got negative 6 x's. So when I add those together, 3 x's plus negative 6 x's, that's the same as 3 take away 6. So that's negative 3 x's. And then finally, looking at the blue terms, I've got negative 4 and positive 8. So when I put those two together, I get plus 4. And that's as simple as I can get. I can't combine any of the terms that I have left over because they have different variables or different exponents, so they can't get mushed together. In the second example, a little bit trickier when we start with a subtracting sign in between the two brackets. We have to take that and subtract all of the terms in the second bracket, not just the first term. So that means that the first bracket stays the same. But I'm going to subtract the 4x squared. I'm going to subtract the negative 6x. So subtracting a negative means that it turns into a positive 6x. And then I'm going to subtract the positive 8, which just makes that a negative 8. So what I've done basically is flipped the sign of all three terms in the second bracket. They all changed sign. And now I can start matching up the like terms, just like I did in the example above. So again, I've got an x squared term here and an x squared term here. When I combine those, I'm thinking about the sign in front of the coefficient. So I've got 2 and negative 4, so that gives me negative 2 when I combine them. And then next I've got 3x and 6x. Those ones have the same variable, same exponent, so I can put them together to get 9x's. And then finally, I've got negative 4 and negative 8. I can put those together to get negative 12. And again, I can't combine anything else in the bottom line there because they have different variables and different exponents. The next thing we're going to review is the distributive law. So the distributive law tells me that I've got a monomial, a one term, in front of the bracket that could have many terms. So here I've got a monomial being multiplied with a trinomial. I can tell it's being multiplied because there is nothing right directly in front of the bracket other than the term. So there's no adding or subtracting sign. It's just the term smacked right up against the bracket. So I know that it's multiplying. So what I'm going to do is multiply the monomial through the bracket. So that means I'm going to distribute it and multiply it by every term in the bracket. So I'm going to take the 2x, and first I'm going to multiply it by x squared. Now we remember from the first part of our lesson That to multiply monomials, we multiply the numbers in front, the coefficients. So here I've got 2, and there's a 1 in front of this one. So 2 times 1 is 2. And then I add the exponents. So don't forget there is an exponent 1 on the first x. So adding those two exponents, I get 1 plus 2 gives me 3. And then I'm going to continue to multiply that 2x by the next term, which is positive 3x. So now I'm again multiplying the coefficients, the numbers in front. 2 times 3 gives me 6. And adding the exponents. So I've got an x and another x here. That gives me x squared, or 2x's being multiplied. And then finally, I'm going to distribute that 2x to the last term in the bracket, which is negative 4. Don't forget that negative sign in front of the 4. So I get 2 times negative 4 gives me negative 8. And there is just one x being multiplied, so that guy just tags along at the end. Now I'm going to try to collect like terms here, but to have like terms, I have to have the same variable with the same exponent. And I don't have that on any of the 3 terms, so I'm done. In the last type of example, we're looking at evaluating expressions. So if I wanted to evaluate 4x squared minus 6x plus 8, if x equals negative 2. So what I'm going to do whenever I'm evaluating if x equals negative 2 is replace all of the x's with the number and calculate. So every time I see an x, I'm going to replace it with a negative 2. So the 4 will stay the same, but the x I will replace in brackets with a negative 2, and it's still being squared. Then I'll move on to the next term, was negative 6x, but I'm going to replace that x with a negative 2. And then the last term was a positive 8. It has no x's, so I don't need to replace anything there. And now I'm just going to grab my calculator and start plugging this in. I'm thinking about BEDMAS, so I'm going to do the squaring first, exponents. So I've got 4 times a negative 2 squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. In the next line, I can do the multiplication. So I've got 4 times 4, that's 16. And then I've got negative 6 times negative 2, that's positive 12. And then plus 8 at the end still. And then finally, I can do the adding at the end here. 16 plus 12 plus 8 gives me 36. And that's it for today's lesson. Your homework is on the sideboard.